This is our star actor, the new Mercedes-Benz Formula One racing car, a car of revolutionary design.
Mr. Gottlieb Daimler had a saying, das Beste oder nichts. And in German that means the best or nothing. And that is Mercedes' marketing slogan throughout most of the world now. But if it were really true that Mercedes would only accept the best, there would have never been a 300 SL Gullwing. To understand the 300 SL, it's important that you think about what life was like in the late 1940s in Germany. The country was obviously in shambles following World War II, and those companies that survived certainly didn't have the resources to spend money lavishly. If you would have asked someone from Mercedes in the late 1940s whether they were returning to racing, their response would have been, "Are you kidding me?" They were literally still fighting for their lives. Though it must have felt like an eternity for those living through food shortages. Through the eyes of history, Germany's return to affluence was pretty quick. And so by 1951, Mercedes was ready to go racing again. It was decided the company would prepare a car for the 1954 Grand Prix, in other words, F1. In the meantime, though, they would make a part-spin sports racer by ghetto rigging a bunch of crap together from the big, heavy S-Class. There wasn't anything actually wrong with the S-Class, but its components were about the furthest things you'd want from a race car. It had a 3-liter straight-six that weighed 585 pounds, and it ran a 6.4-to-1 compression ratio so it could run on iffy post-war fuel. It made all of 115 horsepower, and that was just the beginning. It had a 4-speed cast-iron gearbox, and it had 4-wheel drum brakes. Albert Neubauer, who was in charge of the racing program, said quite elegantly, "The German press and public await the overall victories from the Mercedes-Benz sports cars with which I am entrusted, but don't have the means to deliver." His boss was a boss, though. Rudolf Uhlenhaut wasn't just some sort of exec. He was literally and actually faster than Fangio. And not only could he keep up with the fastest F1 drivers of the time, he could engineer a race car in his sleep. And his reaction to Neubauer was, "You'd better keep your mouth shut, because if management so much as catches wind that you're not entirely on board with this, they will shut down the entire racing department. Capiche?" Or the German version, which is, "Are you picking up what I'm putting down, Schnitzelface?" Now what? Well, if the other components were going to be from the heavy S-Class, then the frame itself had better be super light. Which is, by the way, what SL stands for, super leicht. There were debates for decades about what SL actually stood for, but Mercedes recently happened across a press release from 1952, and whoop, there it is, super leicht. Anyway, in his spare time, Rudi Uhlenhaut had designed a space frame for a Formula 3 car, because that's what you do in your spare time when there's no Netflix. A space frame is just a solution to a math problem. Basically, you're figuring out how to arrange a series of tubes into a truss in such a way that each one of those tubes experiences all or most of the forces on it in tension and compression, not bending. In other words, each of the tubes gets pulled or pushed, but not bent. The result is a frame that's very strong, but super light. And a strange remainder after all that math, by the way, was Rudi's F3 chassis had a high point at the cowl. So does the SL. Look at this, it's right here. In the W194 race car, the entire frame weighed only 110 pounds. To keep the hood low, Mercedes canted the S-Class engine over at 50 degrees. They added more cam and higher compression, but the 3-liter still made only 171 horsepower. Mercedes grooved fins into the outer parts of the brake drums, which would spin close to the wheels and act as centrifugal blowers. At the SL's top speed, each one of these ingenious integral fans would eat up 1 horsepower. Well worth it to keep the brakes cool. The suspension came straight out of the S-Class, no changes. And then Mercedes designed a super aerodynamic body for the car, modeled after the successful Porsche race cars. No, seriously, look at this greenhouse. It's a 356, or a 911 13 years before the 911 was a 911. There was only one small problem with this. When Rudy did all the math for the Formula 3 space frame, it didn't need doors because the race car drivers got in from the top. In order to avoid having to redo all of the math, the sills had to be high, and as a result, the original W194 race cars had tiny little doors. And so, Uhlenhaut and Neubauer took their Tinker Toy part spin thing with the microdoors to Italy to find out what would happen in the race that Mercedes considered to be the most grueling, the 1,000-mile Mille Miglia. And on May 5th, 1952, the 300 SL didn't win. But it came really close, just 4.5 minutes behind a Ferrari. And here's the thing, Mercedes might well have won, except they had a long roadside battle with a wheel bolt that wouldn't come off. Oh, and by the way, the second 300 SL came in 4th, which is really not a bad start. But it wasn't a win. Remember, das Beste oder nichts, the best or nothing. And so, Neubauer goes on record and says, "There is one thing of which you can be absolutely certain. There will be no half measures." Yeah, like making a dollar store race car out of a bunch of sedan stuff. "We will not race again until we have cars that can and will win." You know where this is going. This is Mercedes. Of course they did it. May 18th, 2 weeks later, Mercedes cuts the doors down to make sure they conform with racing rules that specify a minimum opening size. And they show up at the Swiss GP, and the 300 SLs finish 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. June 14th, less than 4 weeks later, the SL shows up at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. It finishes 1st and 2nd. August 3rd, the SL enters the 25th anniversary Nürburgring race. Compared to those other monsters, this is a short race with relatively low speeds, so lightweight is more important than aero. In the intervening 8 weeks, Mercedes had chopped the roof off to save 220 pounds. And the SL finishes 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th in front of 250,000 spectators. Think about this for a second. In a 3-month period, from May until August 1952, the 300 SL, poof, appears out of nowhere, constructed out of parts from a heavy luxury sedan, and almost wins the Mille Miglia. But then goes to Switzerland and sweeps the podium at the Bern Grand Prix. Goes over to France and wins Le Mans 1st and 2nd place, and then goes home to Germany, where it takes 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th at the Nürburgring. So what do you think Mercedes does? Well, of course, they kill the entire 300 SL racing program, because what else is there to prove? Nothing, right? Okay, so then in November, the Mexico distributor for Mercedes calls and is like, "Hey, you guys, you want to enter this thing in the Carrera Panamericana?" Mercedes is like, "Nah, we don't need to do this." But they show up anyway and win 1st and 2nd. By this point, Mercedes had created a complete legend in just one summer and then killed it off because it knew what was coming for the 1954 Grand Prix season. Here's a hint, the 300 SLR, which had a straight 8 with desmodromic valves that went on to win 10 of the 13 Grand Prix it entered, 6 of them with a 1-2 sweep. And then a 1-2 sweep and a 55 Mille Miglia just to say to everyone else. But we're getting ahead of ourselves, because the important part is that Mercedes was happy to just let this thing die. Because Germans, then like now, have a hard time recognizing when they have an icon on their hands. But an Austrian Jew who had moved to New York to escape the Germans in World War II, well, he knew. And so he begged Mercedes to please make a road car out of the W194 300 SL. And thank God and Gottlieb, they listened to him. And here it is, the W198 300 SL, the road car. You'd think taking a race car and selling it to the public would result in it getting bigger and fatter and slower, and nope, not this time. For ease of production, the space frame needed to be modified slightly. Oh, but it still only weighed 181 pounds, which is what I weigh. Mercedes gave the SL openable windows, some interior vents, door struts, and a 34.3-gallon fuel tank that took up the entire trunk. Also, a gorgeous interior, though admittedly the race cars already had really nice interiors because Mercedes. And the 300 SL road cars were even more powerful. Mercedes teamed up with Bosch to develop the world's first gasoline direct injection system. Gas at 680 psi, what could possibly go wrong? There's the joke, nothing did. These things are dead nuts reliable and run perfectly at any temperature and any elevation. That was an unbelievable feat, one that no one tried again for 40 years. The motor had 17-inch long intake runners that peaked in their resonant ram air effect at 5,500 RPM. And unlike the underpowered race cars, the Street SL made 219 horsepower on Mercedes' official dyno. Maximum engine speed was 6,400 RPM, but the magic number was actually 6,000. This is the speed that Mercedes called drehfest, or roughly translated, safe. This was the maximum speed at which the engine could deliver maximum power, given enough fuel and oil, indefinitely. Forever. If other companies were building race cars to demonstrate their technical ability, the SL on the road and on the track was proving Mercedes' utter invincibility. This was the mid-1950s, a time when mass transit cars like the VW Beetle couldn't hit 70 miles an hour. A Porsche could barely manage 100, and the 300 SL could do over 150 miles an hour until the end of time. Mission accomplished on proving Mercedes' superiority. Okay, there was one little problem with the SL. It wanted you dead. It, to quote one magazine, had a habit of coming wildly and suddenly unglued. Another one said it was a wicked and vicious final oversteering monster. And this was all on purpose. See, Mercedes' official stance on this was that it was easier to control a gently oversteering car than an understeering car. Well, of course, they heard that from race car drivers who can deal with that sort of thing. So what you can read into this is that the SL was tuned to handle like a race car because it was a race car. You'd have an easier time with the Roadster, which replaced the coupe entirely for 1957. It had more benign suspension tuning with a low pivot swing axle that tamed the oversteer. And towards the end of production, it even got four-wheel disc brakes. The Roadster's kind of the better car to drive. It rides better, and it gets really, really hot in here. You cook in this cabin. Watch. See? But that is a small price to pay to spend time in what is, without question, the best driving, the best looking, the best performing, the best sounding, the best or nothing sports car of the 1950s. Okay, so you're just gonna keep the Ferrari framed out the entire time, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Action.
I'm not some rich YouTuber asking you to like and subscribe. Hey, up, keep the Ferrari out. I'm an automotive journalist asking you to like and subscribe. And that's because that's how YouTube works. If you don't click those buttons, YouTube doesn't know you liked what you've just seen and isn't gonna show you any more of it. And if you don't like what you've just seen, well, join the club. And by that, I mean the Hagerty Drivers Club, which gets you access to this award-winning magazine, as well as discounts on amazing stuff. And if you still don't like what you've seen, well, then just leave a nasty comment because that's how the internet works. I need to go clean that up.